The bell over the cafe door jingled the same way it always did, except today it made something inside me twitch. I ordered a black coffee, no sugar, no cream, like every morning, but my hand lingered on the counter longer than usual. She was there, by the window, her laptop open, hair pulled loosely, reading glasses perched at the tip of her nose. She looked up, caught my gaze for half a second, then looked away. I didn't look down immediately. I let the second stretch. There was something quiet in her eyes, like she had noticed me noticing her. I folded my hands around my cup, letting the heat seep into my palms. My toast sat forgotten. "Hey," she said finally, soft, just above the hum of the espresso machine. I blinked. "Hey." My voice sounded too loud. "You're always here at this hour," she said, glancing at the empty chair across from her. "Do you live nearby?" Yeah," I said, shrugging like that explained anything. My sleeve caught the edge of the counter. I looked down at the spill of sugar packets I'd accidentally nudged. She smiled just a fraction, not enough to be obvious, but enough to make my stomach hitch. I remembered her name, well, the neighbor's circle did, at least. Not that it mattered if I said it aloud. "Coffee the usual?" she asked, gesturing toward the barista. I nodded. Somehow, the fact that she remembered my order made my chest tighten. Tiny recognition, insignificant to anyone else, but it felt heavy. We settled into a quiet rhythm. She typed, I sipped, we shared the occasional glance when the bell over the door rang. When a man walked in dripping wet from the drizzle outside, she raised her eyebrows, smirked, and whispered something dry that made me chuckle despite myself. "You're soaked." "That's dedication or stupidity." The laugh was small, hesitant. She tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, fingers lingering longer than necessary. I noticed the delicate tilt of her wrist, the way her ring caught the light. Small things that made me want to speak, but I didn't. I checked my phone, no new messages. My thumb hovered over a text I'd drafted yesterday but never sent. "Hey, I was thinking of stopping by later." Nothing more. I deleted the draft and stared at the blank screen for a while before locking it. Habit. Loneliness isn't loud, it's the drafts that sit unsent, the words that pause before they reach the world. She closed her laptop, gathered her bag. The cafe smelled of coffee and rain. I noticed the subtle sigh she let out when the chair scraped against the floor, the slight tug at the hem of her sweater. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was shift my weight from one foot to the other, pretending I was tied up in a decision far less fragile than this. "See you tomorrow?" she asked, not looking directly at me. She slid her bag over one shoulder, eyes briefly flicking toward my hands. "Yeah," I said a little too quickly. I watched her leave, the door jingling behind her, and something cold settled where my chest had been. Then, as I stirred my coffee, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked it up, thumb hovering over the screen. A message blinked in, short, unmistakable. "You're playing with fire." I froze. The cafe noise dimmed. I glanced at the empty window seat, at the rain-slicked streets outside, and typed back without thinking. "Then let me burn." The word sat there, unsent for a moment, like a confession dangling in the air. And that was the thing about fire, you didn't realize how close you were to it until it licked your fingertips. I found her on the landing of our building later that evening, carrying a bag of groceries. Rain still clung to the edges of her coat. "Need a hand?" I asked, already moving toward the door. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded, letting me take half the weight. Our fingers brushed briefly as I shifted the bags, and I felt a spark in the sort of place I usually ignored. "Thanks," she said, and for a moment she didn't look at me. She just stared at the elevator buttons like they were more interesting than the awkward tension between us. "You ever miss it?" I asked, the words out before I could second-guess them. "The kind of life you thought you'd have?" She glanced at me, eyes soft but guarded. "Sometimes," she said. "Before the divorce, I used to make pancakes every Sunday. Even my ex laughed at how serious I got about the syrup." Her hand brushed the strap of her bag, tracing it like a memory. It was ordinary, but it felt like everything mattered. I nodded, imagining her small apartment, the smell of butter and sugar, laughter spilling across a tiny kitchen. My chest ached a little. I never had that, I said quietly. Or I didn't notice. A pause. We just stood there in the hallway, the hum of the city muffled through the walls. I noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear again, slow and deliberate. The rain had left tiny droplets on her collar. You shouldn't be standing here talking to me, she said finally, almost like a warning. Not sharp, not angry, just careful. I swallowed, feeling the weight of all the reasons this was risky. She was older, divorced, a neighbor who knew enough about my life to see through me. And yet, standing there, it felt like nothing else existed but the space between our shoulders. I know, I admitted. My hands fidgeted with the strap of my backpack. But I like talking to you. Even if it's stupid. She tilted her head, a ghost of a smile brushing her lips. Not stupid. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Strangely nice, actually. We carried the bags inside, set them on the counter. The kitchen smelled faintly of garlic and onions from her dinner preparations. I watched her peel a carrot, the thin blade scraping the vegetable with quiet concentration. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the ache I felt, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I leaned against the doorway, sipping the tea she handed me, noticing the small warmth that radiated through the porcelain. Our knees brushed accidentally under the table, and she didn't move away. She raised her eyes, caught mine, and held the gaze just long enough to make my heart stutter. Sometimes I think, she said, setting down her mug, life is just a series of near misses. Things that almost happen, things you almost say. Her hand hovered over hers, resting lightly on the table. And sometimes you take the wrong turn and it changes everything. I smiled, though a little bitterly. Maybe that's what makes it worth noticing when someone finally sees you. Her lips twitched. She reached across, touching my hand with hers for a heartbeat that stretched too long. Not a gesture of possession, more like acknowledgement. A quiet signal that this connection, impossible as it might be, existed. And in that touch, I felt all the risk, all the longing, all the things we weren't allowed to say. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I found her on the balcony that evening, the city lights flickering behind her. She was leaning on the railing, arms crossed, shoulders tight, like she was holding something back. Long day? I asked, stepping close but not too close. My hands shoved into my pockets. She shrugged, eyes fixed on the street below. Not really. Just thinking. I didn't press. There's a difference between saying nothing and letting silence weigh. I leaned against the railing beside her, close enough to notice the scent of her shampoo, the faint warmth radiating off her coat. The quiet stretched. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice died mid-thought. She shifted, pulling her arms tighter around herself. Her eyes flicked toward mine for half a second, then away. You don't have to. She started, then stopped. I tilted my head. Have to what? Stay. Her words came out soft, hesitant. Then she laughed, a dry sound, almost like a cough. Or maybe I'm imagining this. I stayed, letting the quiet answer for me. Fingers brushing the railing, I caught myself glancing at her hands, how they flexed and relaxed, restless and careful. The kind of small gesture that says more than words. The sound of a door creaking made both of us jump. A neighbor, one I didn't recognize, passed by, tossing a casual greeting. She stiffened instantly, stepping back, forcing me to step away too. The distance felt sharp. I cleared my throat, almost embarrassed. Coffee tomorrow? I asked. My voice sounded too eager. She hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but calculation. Maybe, she said, a little clipped, like she wanted to remind herself of the rules we both silently agreed upon. We ended up leaning against the balcony railing again, this time a little more careful, a little more polite. But then she laughed softly at something I said, a tiny slip of humor, unnoticed by anyone else, and the warmth came back. I could see the tension in her jaw ease just a fraction. God, I muttered under my breath, almost to myself. Why does it have to feel like this? She didn't answer. She just turned slightly, brushing her hair back, and for one heart-stopping moment, our faces were so close I could feel her breath. I wanted to lean in, close the distance, feel something undeniable. Then she moved, just a hair's breadth away, enough to stop the momentum. Not a rejection, but a reminder of the line we couldn't cross. I looked at her, trying to read her expression, and caught that fleeting hesitation, the split second where desire met restraint. And just like that, it was gone. She pulled her coat tighter, muttered something about heading inside, and stepped away. I stayed on the balcony for a long minute, tracing the echo of almost. The almost kiss. The almost confession. My chest felt hollow, and at the same time, too full of something I wasn't ready to name. Almost. That was all we had. We met outside her building again, a Tuesday that had the chill of early autumn in the air. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk, and the city smelled faintly of wet asphalt. I was fumbling with my jacket zipper when she appeared, coffee cup in hand. Hey, I said, voice low, almost swallowed by the morning hum. She gave a small nod, no smile, but the corners of her eyes softened when they caught mine. We walked together in silence for a few blocks, the space between us filled only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words piled up like stones in my chest. Finally, she stopped by a bench in the park. Set her cup down, hands curling around it as if it were an anchor. You talk to anyone else, like you talk to me? The question hit softer than I expected, but it made my throat dry. I swallowed. Not really. Her eyes flicked away, tracing the edges of the park path, then back at me. I don't know why it matters. But it does. Something twisted in my chest. Her voice was quiet, controlled, but the pause after the words was loud. I wanted to reach out, touch her hand, something that said I felt the same pull, the same hesitation. I think about you, I said, just enough to let the truth slip. More than I should. My hands dug into my pockets. I don't even know why. She glanced down at the bench between us, fingers fidgeting at the edge of her sleeve. I know, she whispered. Her voice was almost stolen by the wind, fragile like a secret. I swallowed again, imagining a dozen ways this could go wrong, neighbors noticing, rumors, boundaries we weren't supposed to test. But the words that formed in my head wouldn't stay quiet. I don't want to mess things up, I said, voice barely above a murmur. But I can't stop thinking. I trailed off, realizing the words were too much. Too real. She looked at me then, fully, eyes unguarded for the first time. The tension hung between us like a held breath. You're reckless, she said softly. And I. Her sentence broke off. She closed her eyes, letting a tiny exhale escape. We sat there, bench cold beneath us, coffee growing tepid in her hand. I could feel the pull of all the things we weren't saying, the desire, the fear, the rules we were both circling. Every micro-gesture, every glance, every pause seemed louder than any shouted confession. Finally, she set her cup down on the bench, fingers brushing mine accidentally. Just a touch. Electric. Meant nothing, meant everything. I wanted to say, I need this. I can't stop. Instead, I just asked, voice trembling in the quiet. Do you want this too? The words hovered between us. The answer was somewhere in her eyes, somewhere in the brief brush of her hand against mine, but she didn't speak. Not yet. And that's when I realized I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't take back. I stopped seeing her at the usual time. The bench we'd claimed, the walk we'd shared, it felt empty, like someone had pulled the color out of the city. I checked the hallway of her building, my hand hovering over the doorbell, but I didn't ring it. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. Sorry. Busy. Later. No signature. No hint. Just 3 words that made my chest hollow. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a routine thing, a random delay. But my mornings were off. The coffee at the cafe went cold. I caught myself glancing at the empty spot by the window, imagining her there, laptop open, hair loose. When I finally saw her again, it was by accident. She was walking down the street, bundled up, a stroller beside her. My stomach dropped. A child. Something she hadn't mentioned. I froze, hiding behind a pole, just watching. She noticed me for a split second, her expression neutral, then she kept walking. I wanted to call out, to explain, to ask anything, but the words lodged in my throat. The moment passed. The city swallowed her up. For days, I left messages unsent. I'm here if you want to talk. Deleted. I miss you. Deleted. My phone glowed in the dark, a silent judge. Then came the day she appeared at the cafe again, but different. Distant. Smiling politely, nodding at the barista, ordering her coffee without catching my gaze. She sat in a corner, back to the window, a book open but untouched. I wanted to cross the room, to sit beside her, to pull the world back into its fragile rhythm. Instead, I lingered by the counter, sipping my coffee slowly, watching her sip hers with a quiet tension in her jaw. Every little thing I had memorized, the tilt of her head, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the flicker of humor in her eyes, felt like it belonged to someone else now. The pause in our connection was sharper than any fight, louder than any argument. I imagined every scenario. Did she see someone else? Did she realize I was too young, too reckless? Or had life simply reminded her of the boundaries we'd danced around too closely? The cafe clock ticked, the espresso machine hissed, and I sat frozen in the in-between. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I left without saying anything. The chair across from her remained empty, a quiet testament to all the words I hadn't spoken. The door closed behind me, and I wondered if she noticed I'd been there at all. I found her in her kitchen that evening, chopping vegetables for dinner. The light from the window cut across the counter in thin lines, dust motes, floating in the amber glow. I didn't knock. I leaned against the frame, hands stuffed in my pockets, pretending I belonged to the shadows. She glanced up, eyebrows raised, a flicker of surprise, and maybe relief, crossing her face. Hey, I said, voice low, careful. Hey, she replied, not looking up from the knife. Her hands moved with habitual precision, but the pause between cuts was deliberate, almost as if she were holding herself steady. I swallowed. I've been stupid, I said. The words trembled. I stopped showing up, stopped saying anything. And it wasn't fair. Not to you. She finally looked at me, eyes soft but cautious. I didn't know what you wanted. Or what I wanted, she said quietly. I didn't want to mess up. You're not messing anything up, I said quickly. Then I faltered. Not unless we let it. She studied me, the line of her jaw tightening slightly. I could see her thinking through the years, the rules, the reasons this was complicated, impossible even. And still, she didn't walk away. I took a step closer, careful, aware of the weight of the room. I want to see you. Talk to you. Like we did, I said, voice barely above a whisper. Even if it's risky. Even if it's stupid. A small, nearly imperceptible smile appeared on her lips. She set the knife down and leaned back on the counter, arms crossed loosely. You're reckless, she said softly. Her eyes didn't leave mine. But okay. The word hung between us, simple. Quiet. Final enough to carry a weight I hadn't expected. I let my shoulders relax. She reached over, touching my hand lightly, just enough to make my chest warm. Not a promise, not a declaration, just acknowledgement. We didn't speak for a long moment. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint aroma of garlic and onions, the small scrape of her shoes against the tiles, everything filled the space that words hadn't claimed. And then she said nothing. I said nothing. But in the pause, in the touch, in that tiny nod of, okay, everything we hadn't dared to say until now existed. It was enough. Weeks passed. The mornings settled into rhythm again, soft and familiar. I found myself at the cafe at 8:47 a.m., exactly as I always had, but now she was there too, quietly folding her napkin before sipping her black coffee. We didn't announce anything. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. Just the quiet acknowledgement that mornings were better when we shared them. I learned the subtle curve of her smile before it reached her eyes, the way she hummed softly when she thought no one was listening. Some days we took the long walk through the park, past the bench where the leaves had skittered that first tense autumn. She held my hand briefly, just enough to feel real, just enough to remind me that the world hadn't shifted entirely. Tea on her balcony became our ritual. Sometimes she talked, sometimes I did. Sometimes neither of us said a word, letting the city hum around us. The unsent texts, the paused conversations, the almost confessions, they all seemed like ghosts we left behind. She told me one evening about a pancake sundae she'd started again, and I laughed quietly, noticing the faint light catching her ring just as it had the first time I noticed it. Ordinary. Stupid. Beautiful. The neighborhood still moved around us, indifferent to the small orbit we'd carved out. My youth and her experience, our quiet compromises, the tiny boundaries we navigated, they didn't vanish. But they didn't matter. Not in this. Not in the slow, steady warmth of being seen. I didn't need her to say she loved me. I didn't need to. She poured my coffee just the way I liked it, tucked her hair behind her ear in the same deliberate way, let me borrow her umbrella without a word. That was enough. That was our quiet gravity. And sometimes, when the light fell across the table just right, or when her fingers brushed mine accidentally as we reached for the same spoon, I'd remember the pause, the nearlies, the unsent messages. And I'd smile. Not loudly. Not for anyone else. Just for me. And for her. I don't know if anyone else would notice, but I did. And she did too. That's enough. Ch2.